Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to try to explain what are central bank digital currencies and should they be implemented, how are they going to affect us? So let's get started. What are central bank digital currencies? Central bank digital currencies are nothing but virtual form of uh, a fiat currency. The question that comes to mind here is we already have a virtual form of digital currencies in in our bank accounts with digital dollar or digital yuan. While that is a digital or a virtual form of fiat currency, but when we are talking about CBDCs, we are talking about cryptographic form of virtual currency. So CBDC is nothing but a digital token like a private cryptocurrency, which is a country's official currency issued and regulated by its central bank and backed just like fiat currency, backed by full faith and credit of the issuing sovereign government. So we agree that CBDCs are like private cryptocurrencies. Then how are they different from each other? So to put it simply, CBDCs is a cryptocurrency only. But unlike private cryptocurrency, CBDC is issued by a central bank, whereas private cryptocurrency is issued by a private entity. And like private cryptocurrency, CBDCs get their value due to network effect or community effect. But unlike private cryptocurrency, network effect of a CBDC is limited to citizens of a country, whereas network effect of a private crypto is not limited by any border. So anybody in the world can purchase or sell a private cryptocurrency. So the next question that comes to mind is why not use private currencies? Why even bother with creation of CBDC? I mean, there are so many of those. So the central banks provide their justification in multiple ways. And the first one is private cryptos are controlled by private entities and not by a central bank. In other words, that private entity can actually go crazy and print it to infinity, causing hyperinflation into that currency and convert it into confetti. Now, while this argument is there, but that doesn't mean it is valid. It is a possibility that private entity can go crazy, and there is no doubt a lot of private cryptos are kind of worthless and scams only. But that doesn't mean that every private crypto is worthless or will or can be printed to infinity. For example, Bitcoin. And this is a very apt example because Bitcoin has been adopted by El Salvador now, which is a country. So the next reason that central banks give is private cryptos are very volatile, and fiat currencies are supposed to be stable because that stability helps us uh, easily value things. If the currency is so volatile, how do you manage the calculation of things into that currency? And to extent this is a valid argument, private cryptocurrencies are very volatile, and this is causing a, a hindrance, or this is a hindrance in the adoption by central banks. But the argument against this point is, aren't central banks fiat currencies, um, even though they are not volatile in a short span, but they lose their purchasing power over long time span, because the central bank entities can coerce their population into the adoption. uh, Decision made by central banks or the governments, whether those decisions are bad, have to be accepted by the public. Whereas in a case of a private crypto, because it is adopted all over the world, if the decision made by that private entity is not good, then people are free to get rid of that cryptocurrency and they can't be coerced into adoption. So the third reason that central banks provide is that private cryptos are inelastic, and central banks, just like fiat, want the currency to be elastic to address economic cycles, ups and downs in economic cycle. And the argument against this point is, yes, elasticity does help in controlling ups and downs, but it is this elasticity only that, by way of uncontrolled credit expansion or credit contraction, causes these bubbles and downturns in the economy to begin with. So, next question that comes to mind is, how many type of CBDCs are there? In broad terms, there are two types: wholesale and retail CBDCs. And in order to understand these two types, let me explain how commercial banks work, and that would clarify how these two types will work. So commercial banks, think of this way: commercial banks have two type of ledgers, and let's call them a front end and a back end ledger. So the back end ledger is used to manage transactions between the commercial banks and commercial bank and central banks, and that ledger has assets and liabilities like bank reserves, mortgage backed securities, treasury bonds, etc., etc. It can also have cash in there as well. uh, but the other ledger, which is facing the public, or let's call it front end ledger, has assets and liabilities like mortgage loans or car loans or personal loans and cash. Now, in case of wholesale CBDC, only that back-end ledger and the back-end process is replaced with CBDC. While in case of retail CBDC, both back-end and front-end are replaced with CBDC. Now there is a third type as well, which I haven't, put in here, which is potentially you can get rid of middlemen, which is the commercial banks here, and individuals will have direct account with central bank, in which case that central bank basically adopts or merges wholesale and retail into one, and it becomes one CBDC. So with the types out of the way, next question some of you would ask is why central banks want to replace fiat with CBDCs? And there are number of reasons behind this. First one is converting all the cash into CBDC would allow them to track and tax every transaction. And this is because if every transaction is going through a central bank entity or some sort of central entity, then everything is tracked and hence can be taxed. This will basically kind of get rid of informal economy. Everything will be formalized. Second reason is banning cash would allow central banks to push interest rates into negative territory. Now, I did a very long video yesterday on negative interest rates and how they are going to affect us. Please go through that to understand negative interest rates more in detail. Third reason would be central banks, by implementation of CBDCs, uh, can implement an expiring currency. And this will be to ensure that currency is not hoarded, and this will incentivize consumption over savings. Because if currency has an expiration date, then why would you want to uh, let it expire? You would rather spend it. Next reason would be tra- transaction can be capped. So CBDCs will give power to a central entity to cap a transaction to a certain value. Should they want to control flow of that currency into an asset class? A good example would be if they want to limit purchase of gold to only certain limit, then they can cap those transactions. The next reason would be transactions can be taxed. Um, if, like in the previous one, if they are not able to get away with capping transactions, and they want to control flow of currency into that XYZ asset class, instead of capping it, what they can do is they can tax those transactions at much higher rate. So again, giving the same similar example, um, purchase in gold can be taxed at higher rate. Next reason is very closely tied with the first one, which was track and tax everything, but it goes even beyond that. So anonymity will be completely lost, and central banks, while they justify financial inclusion to be one of the reasons why CBDC should be implemented, but this loss of anonymity will actually provide them power to financially exclude the individuals if for any reason they do want it. Now, with fiat currency, at least public has a recourse of legal tender, which is in form of cash. But with CBDCs, that alternate is also gone. So you will be potentially can be completely financially excluded from the system. And another reason could be easy implementation of universal basic income. Now, this is because if the currency has an expiration date, then central entities can control how the currencies are used with more programmability, especially if the currency is provided via dole rather than earned via wages. For example, like today, if people get these food stamps via cards and stuff, and they try to sell it for cash. Um, in other words, government is not achieving the goal of why the food stamps are being provided. That those sort of loopholes can be plugged. So government can say, hey, you are getting this much money, this much amount of this total can be used for food, this much can be for other groceries and stuff, and this much for milk and so on and so forth. Not only that, it can actually go to the stretch to the point where government can actually implement substitution of things if one or the other is in scarcity. For example, if people purchase milk of good quality today and that for reason of price controls or higher inflation is in scarcity, uh, then government can through programmable currency can enforce substitution. So the next question then comes to mind is, when are CBDCs coming? There is no easy answer to this, and each country will have its own appetite and timeline for adoption. China is one of the few which has already launched their CBDC. Either it was early this year or end of last year. It hasn't achieved a lot of success yet, but that doesn't mean they countries or governments won't push for CBDCs. Sweden is very close to implement one. Next question that comes to mind is how will it affect individuals, people like you and me? And as explained above, banning cash would and implementation of CBDCs would allow governments to track and tax everything. It would allow them to implement negative interest rates. Currency will be programmable and potentially expiring in nature. Transactions can be capped or taxed at higher rates. Anonymity that is provided by cash will be completely gone. And basically the financial privacy will be lost. Central bank entities, as I just explained, would potentially have power to unbank anybody if they are not following the narrative, maybe even resisting the narrative. They can bring these substitution and force substitutions as well. So what are our options? Well, the only option is to have assets that are outside of banks and government control. It can be physical gold and silver. It cannot be paper gold and silver because, again, those transactions can be monitored. And if they are monitored, they can be taxed at higher rates. But physical gold and silver is outside of the system. It can be private cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which have, you know, good community backing, or they are scarce. Now, government will definitely, because these private cryptos are competing with CBDCs, government will try to either ban them, or if they cannot achieve banning them, then they will potentially try to tax them. Other options could be, cars or expensive watches, which can maintain purchasing power. So yeah, these are my thoughts on CBDCs. Thanks for listening. Please share your thoughts, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you next time. Bye.